Welcome to the North Carolina Department of Information Technology's Division of Broadband and Digital Equity quarterly BEAD and Digital Equity webinar. We are going to be recording the webinar. So we'll place the slides and the webinar recording on the website, which is ncbroadband.gov, later on this week. Today, I'm joined by several colleagues, Maggie Woods, the Deputy Director of the Office of Digital Equity, and Emily Ganji, the Policy Director for the division, who will be providing updates on BEAD and digital equity. Today, we're going to change it up a little bit and start with digital equity. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. We will take the digital equity questions immediately following Maggie's information that she presents, and then we'll move over to the BEAD information and take questions at the end for those. Now, if you don't get your questions in on digital equity at the beginning, we will still take those at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Maggie Woods.
Great, thanks, Crystal, and good afternoon, everyone. We can move to the next slide. It's really exciting to see so many familiar faces, or I should say names, in the chat. Welcome to 2024. This is our first quarterly webinar of 2024. And I have a short but very sweet update on the digital equity plan. And the big news came out last week, our digital equity plan has been officially approved by the federal government. And it's too long of a list to thank all the amazing people who helped us get here, from the people who attended our listening sessions and took our survey, to the people who met with us bi-weekly or weekly to help throughout the planning process and to do the research and to write the plan. But really, this was a huge lift from many, many people. So a huge thank you to everyone who was involved. Last time we did one of these webinars, we had just published our draft digital equity plan. That was in December. We did receive 180 public comment. And so people really took the time to read through the draft, to provide really thorough comments. So if you were one of those people, or your organization provided a public comment, thank you, thank you. It made our plan better. It made it stronger. I can tell you, I personally read every single word of every single comment, and then we incorporated each and every one of those comments into the final version of the digital equity plan. And so once we did that kind of review of the comments and added them to the plan, then we had to send the plan back to the National Telecommunications and Information Administration for review. They had a little bit of back and forth feedback for us, but not a whole lot because of all the amazing people who are a part of this process. And then we resubmitted a final version, and they accepted that version just a couple weeks ago. So if you're interested in seeing what that final version looks like, you can find it on our website. And if you go to the next slide, you can get a little bit of a preview of what that looks like. So the content is very similar if you read the draft, though, of course, better based on public comment. But it does look like a very pretty version of that draft. And we are now working on getting the executive summary translated into other languages. So those will be up within the next couple of months. So please, if you have questions on that, you can reach out. And I saw that Emily just put the link to the digital equity plan in the chat, so you can use that link. And moving to the next slide, back in December, I did a much deeper overview of what's in this really thorough digital equity plan. I just wanted to do kind of very, very high level reminder of what is this all about. And then if you all have questions, we can go into those, but you can definitely dig deeper as you look into the digital equity plan yourselves. But one of the biggest tasks we had when outlining this plan was really to identify what are the biggest barriers to digital inclusion for people across the state. And, we did a survey, we had varying types of listening sessions. We talked to experts in the field and to everyday people, and we kind of started to put all of these barriers into 5 key categories. So the first was access to and the affordability of high-speed internet. So one of the biggest barriers The second was accessibility and inclusivity of online resources. And so this was especially a major concern of people who are non-native English speakers or people with disabilities, is being able to access important public resources online in their language of choice or in a format that's accessible to them. The third is digital literacy, right? Do people know the basics of navigating a computer? We heard a lot from parents who really need more support in understanding how to support their kids in school. We heard from people wanting to learn how to use a computer so they can build a resume so that they can move forward in their career. And we heard about people kind of in all spectrums of understanding and using the computer to want to improve their skills in order to move up the job ladder. We also heard across the board the need for more support on cybersecurity and privacy. Almost no one feels completely confident in keeping themselves safe online. And this, of course, makes sense because everything is changing all of the time. When it comes to keeping yourself safe, hackers are very sophisticated. And so, kind of no matter who you are in the state, there's this need to make sure that you understand how to keep yourself safe online. And then finally, one of the biggest barriers we saw was not having a device or not having sufficient devices in your household. We heard a lot from people who may have a computer sent home for school, but that's the only computer they have in the house, and it often has to be returned in the summer, or people having aging devices that really aren't functioning for their schoolwork, for their work, their professional work, or just for entertainment, accessing telehealth services, accessing financial systems. So these were kind of the five big barriers that we discovered through this planning process. And moving to the next slide, we also developed kind of 5 key strategies for addressing those barriers. And just a reminder, this is super high level. Under each of these strategies, we have key measurable objectives, and then we talk about how we plan to address those measurable objectives and to achieve those measurable objectives. But the first strategy is that we want to ensure that all North Carolinians have access to high-speed internet and to affordable, low-cost internet services. So this is just significant overlap between the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program that Emily is going to provide an update on. The second is promoting practices that support online accessibility and inclusivity of public resources and services. So again, making sure that people can access the resources that are available online in an accessible and inclusive manner. The third is ensuring that North Carolinians can acquire the digital skills and understanding to meet their personal needs and the workforce needs of the state. Fourth strategy is promoting practices and leverage tools to ensure online privacy and security. And the fifth strategy is ensuring that North Carolinians have access to the digital devices that meet their needs. So how are we going to do this? What's next? Well, I'm glad you asked. If we move to the next slide, you can kind of see what's next in this process. So you may have seen a press release that came out that the National Telecommunications and Information Administration just launched the Notice of Funding Opportunity, that's what NOFO stands for the Digital Equity Capacity Grant Program. So this is a grant program that's only available to states who develop digital equity plans. All 50 states and US territories develop digital equity plans. So we're the ones who are only eligible to apply. This is the first of 3 rounds of capacity grant funding. So in this first round, we can apply for $22 million to implement the digital equity plan. Applications are due May 28th. We do have to apply, but we do also expect to receive the funds. And we do expect that the award date for this will be fall 2024. So that's really when implementation activities will start to ramp up. But know that we're working on getting kind of all of the systems into place and are getting started on many of what's outlined in the digital equity plan now, even if funding hasn't come through just yet. I also wanted to flag 2 other important activities that are coming up. The first is, if you'll recall, in the digital equity planning process, we identified as many assets, as many resources that are available to meet digital inclusion needs around the state. So we identified, where there's public computer labs, where you can go to get digital literacy classes, where you can go to get public Wi-Fi. And overall, we identified about 1,400 what we call assets, supported by about over 900 organizations. And we're working to get this online, publicly available, so that if you're looking for, say, classes that are in Spanish supporting basic digital literacy in Granville County, you'll be able to look that up in an online database. So that is expected to launch this summer. We're really excited about it. This is also something we'll be continuing to build, because while we know we collected a lot of resources, there's a lot of resources that we didn't collect, right? That every day I'm learning about new programs that I didn't know about, and that's fantastic. And we want to make sure that this is continually updated, continually improving. And then finally, I wanted to put something on everyone's radar, because I'm already getting a lot of questions about it, as we should be getting a lot of questions, is when, I'm a nonprofit or I'm a local government, when can I apply for funding? Well, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration will be releasing a competitive grant program coming out this fall. The expected release date will probably be in September. And this will be available to anyone who wasn't the state, who's not the state, who developed the digital equity plan to apply for. So these will be organizations in North Carolina can apply for these funds. This is a $1.25 billion fund. So it's national, but our goal is to get as many North Carolina entities prepared and able and hopefully winning this funding as possible. So we'll definitely make sure people know about this funding when it comes out. We'll be prepping as much as possible. But if you have questions about all this funding coming down the line, now is a great time to answer, to ask those questions. I'm happy to answer them. But just know that some big funding is coming out from the federal government specifically to focus on digital equity and digital inclusion activities. So I'm going to stop right here. And as Crystal mentioned, we are taking some questions now on digital equity planning, or anything that the digital equity team is working on. So you can type those questions in the chat. And then I'll be around the whole time too. So if you think of other questions, we can get to those as well. Crystal, I didn't see any come through the chat, but did I miss anything?
You did not. We did receive some very nice compliments on the plan and how beautiful it is and it being approved. So all great news. And thank you to everyone who's commented and put in feedback ahead of time. We really appreciate it. We couldn't have done it without you.
Truly, the amount of people who spent time and energy supporting this planning process is just extraordinary. Any other questions people want to know about? Okay, can you explain the NOFO that will be coming out in the fall? Bridget, hi Bridget, asked that question. Bridget was on one of our working groups. Great question. So I can tell you what I know, which I'll say is not a whole lot because they haven't published the NOFO. But this fall will come out this, like I mentioned, it's the Digital Equity Competitive Grant Program. It's a $1.25 billion fund. I believe it's going to be spread out over kind of 3 rounds of funding. So I believe that. So this will be the first round coming out this fall. And this, we don't know exactly who's going to be eligible, but we think it'll likely be nonprofits, local government, regional entities like regional councils of government, higher education institutions. So kind of all the kinds of entities that are not the state. So again, we'll know more when the NOFO comes out, but we don't know how much entities can apply for, but we do know that they will be specific to advanced digital inclusion efforts in the state. So part of the reason why our office rolled out our Digital Champion Grant program. So this was a program that we've rolled out through ARPA funds. Announcements will be made in May. But one of the reasons why we rolled that out now was to start prepping organizations to be thinking through different kinds of projects, beginning to build their capacity so that organizations can be prepped to apply for this grant funds. In terms of preparing for this NOFO coming out, I believe the National Digital Inclusion Alliance is encouraging organizations to receive a sam.gov number if you don't already have one. That can take a little bit of time, and it's something that you'll definitely need in order to apply for this funding. And then to kind of start thinking about the kinds of programs you might want to apply for. If you want to partner with organizations, thinking about who you might want to partner with. Again, we don't have a lot of specifics yet. So it's a little bit hard to provide specific help with how to prepare, but kind of all of those things can help you get ready for the next 6 months. Bridget, I hope that answered your question. Bruce asks, how many additional rounds of capacity grants do we anticipate the state to receive on top of the 22 million? So we expect there'll be 2 other rounds, Bruce. So Bruce Clark is on our core planning team. So thank you, Bruce, for all the work that you've done. We don't know the full amount of funding that we will receive at the moment, but we do expect that there'll be 2 other rounds after this round. Yeah, I think, did I answer all those questions?
You've answered them all. Do we have any additional digital equity questions? Okay, hearing none, what we'll do is hand it over to Emily Ganji, who's going to talk about the BEAD program. Here we go.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us on a Monday, and especially joining us during an eclipse. We didn't think about the eclipse when we scheduled our webinar about a month ago. So thanks for being inside with us instead of outside experiencing that. But hopefully we'll be done. You'll have time to still see the eclipse if you are so interested. To start out, this is still the best map that we have of the FCC's broadband fabric. It's the same one that I showed you in December, which it had just come out. It was hot off the presses then. We are continuing to submit challenges on behalf of residents and businesses in North Carolina. We submitted several thousand in March to the FCC regarding locations and availability. So I encourage folks to keep using our broadband survey to submit information to us that we can then use to submit challenges on your behalf to the FCC. We've got several folks who are continuously working to make sure that mapping is as accurate as it can be, because that'll be the basis for determining which locations are eligible to receive BEAD funding to improve their internet infrastructure in our state. So if you go to the next slide, Crystal. I also want to mention again that we are still maintaining the county broadband profiles. These get updated frequently, and it's a great way if you're interested in a particular county or counties to get the best data available for that particular county regarding what awards have already been made in the county, which ones are contingent, which areas are protected because of other federal funding that's been allocated to those locations. And there's also a lot of data around digital equity and adoption of internet services and some other metrics that are important as well. So we'll drop that link in the chat too. Want to make sure everybody's aware of that resource. Next slide, please. So quick refresher, BEAD, and I am going to say BEAD a lot because the name's just too long otherwise. It stands for Broadband Equity Access and Deployment, which is a program administered by the NTIA, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, in the U.S. Department of Commerce. And this program was created as part of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And because of all the good work that folks on this call and around our state have been doing to help get the best mapping available in North Carolina, North Carolina received an allocation of $1.53 billion that we're eligible to access through this program to expand internet access in our state, which we're very excited about. And the eligible uses of funding, the simple version is listed on this slide. The primary purpose of this program is to get infrastructure, internet infrastructure to homes and businesses in our state. We can also use, once we've can assure the NTIA that we're going to be able to serve all the unserved and underserved locations who are eligible in our state, we can also use the funding to upgrade community anchor institutions and make sure they have 1 gigabit symmetrical service to do the important work that they do to improve digital access and digital skills in our state. those can be education institutions, nonprofits, community centers, senior centers. If you check out our initial proposal, which we'll show our link to later, you can see how we're defining community anchor institutions and the different categories who will be eligible. So we're going to be working on an inventory of those this year so that we're ready and know who needs to be included when we start making BEAD awards. And then, of course, it can be used for mapping and data collection. We're doing a lot of that. And then once we've done those infrastructure things, any remaining funds are allowed by the federal government to be used for non-deployment purposes, is how NTIA refers to them. And so really those are all the digital equity purposes that are covered in our digital equity plan. And we're hopeful that North Carolina will have some money left over once we achieve the infrastructure goals to put some of that money towards those important digital equity strategies as well. Next slide, please. We've been using this timeline since the planning process began in November 2022, and we changed the color from blue to green to orange every time we get something done. It makes us all feel a little better about the intense work that we're doing, but eventually we're going to have to move on. We'll have to get rid of the old stuff and show you get more detail on the new stuff. But since we were last together, as Maggie mentioned, our digital equity plan got approved. We're really excited about that. We also submitted our initial proposal to the NTIA for the BEAD funding. We got that submitted in on December 22nd. And since that time, we've been in the process of curing with NTIA, which is what they call it when they tell us what they want us to change and we negotiate with them. I think of it as more of a negotiation. Being from North Carolina, to me, curing sounds like we're making ham, but that's how they refer to it. So that's how we'll refer to it too. So we're still in that negotiation phase with NTIA on both our volume 1 and volume 2 of our initial proposal. The other big things that'll happen this year in 2024 are we'll run the challenge process. We're aiming to do that this fall to determine which locations will be eligible for the funding. We're planning to start our subgrantee selection process this summer through and what that will look like is we're going to do a pre-qualification round where providers can apply to be pre-qualified to be eligible for BEAD funding. And then in 2025, we'll do the subgrantee selection process where providers will bid on particular project areas in our state. Our BEAD final proposal will also be due sometime in 2025. So once our Volume 2 gets approved by NTIA, we refer to it as a shot clock starts. But once that we get that Volume 2 approval, we'll have 365 days from that date to complete the subgrantee selection and challenge processes and submit a final proposal to NTIA with all the awards that we recommend be made in our state using the $1.53 billion. So it's a really tight timeline, and we're all doing all we can to get as much done before that shot clock starts as we can. And then, of course, these programs, the funding is available through 2028, so the work will continue on implementation throughout those following years. Next slide, please, Crystal. So we've mentioned it before, but for folks who may be joining us for the first time, we submitted the state's 5-year plan. Think of this as our strategic plan in summer of 2023, and that was approved by NTIA in August. And then we began the work of doing our initial proposal, which is much more tactical than the more simple strategic plan that was approved in the summer. That's where we had to get really specific about how we were going to meet all the many requirements of NTIA for use of this funding and follow their process. So we'll put a link to that in the chat as well. Next slide, Crystal. So as I mentioned before, our initial proposal involves 2 volumes. Volume 1 is primarily about the challenge process that we'll use for the mapping and about how we'll define community anchor institutions who will be eligible for funding to upgrade service at their locations. Volume 2 is primarily about the subgrantee selection process and all of the many requirements that will be required for use of these funds and how we'll make sure to meet all those requirements and help our subgrantees meet those requirements. Volume 2 also includes a workforce plan, which is where the state has described what we're going to do and who we're going to work with to make sure we have the workforce that we need to make this big investment. So anytime you're investing $1.5 billion And that's in addition to the almost $1 billion we're in the process of investing now through American Rescue Plan Act funds. That's a major infusion for infrastructure and construction in our state, and we have to make sure we have the workforce that we need to make that happen in the timeline that's required for the funds. So we've got a link there to the workforce plan in particular for folks who are interested in that. As I mentioned, we're still in the procuring process with NTIA. They've told us they expect that to last through April or May. I think we're getting close on our volume 1. We're going back and forth with them more quickly now. We got a couple more requests late Friday, and they want to hear back from us by tomorrow. So the turnaround time is getting more compressed too. So I feel like we're getting close on that one. And as soon as both of these volumes get approved by NTIA, we will post the new versions on our website so that everybody has the most up-to-date information. Volume 2, I think will more likely take into May because NTIA seems really focused on Volume 1 right now because states can't begin their challenge process for the mapping of eligible locations until Volume 1 is approved. So I think we'll hear about Volume 1 first. Next slide, please. So this is another timeline looking farther into the future. So you can see that we're the dark blue line is the BEAD program, and we thought it would be helpful to share this information in the context of the other American Rescue Plan Act programs that we're also implementing at this point. So you can see the BEAD curing process that I talked about that we expect to continue into the second quarter of this year. And then the pre-qualification process, we plan to launch that this summer and announce it probably in June. And we're thinking applications would be due around August. We don't have specific dates yet. So as we're negotiating with NTIA, that all impacts our specific dates, but I wanted to give you all a sense of what the tentative timeline is. So we expect to announce that process in the summer, and those would be due August, September. And we want to make sure everybody's pre-qualified by December so that they're ready to begin applying. Those who make it through the pre-qualification process are ready to apply for the specific or to submit proposals for the specific project areas that are defined for implementing the BEAD funds. We expect to start the second phase of that subgrantee selection process in January of 2025. That's when we'll release the maps of the project areas for BEAD implementation, and providers will have an opportunity to submit proposals to bid on those project areas, and it'll be a competitive and open process. And then, as I mentioned, we have to have that process complete by whatever date our final proposals due, which is 365 days from when Volume 2 gets approved. So it'll likely be sometime before June of 2025, depending on what that date is. So the way it's important to point this out too, the state will make contingent awards to internet service providers for projects to serve eligible locations in the state, but those awards won't be official until NTIA approves them as well. And so then after NTIA approves them, we would begin the contracting process to go from contingent to contracted, which is different than the American Rescue Plan Act funds. So you can see there where we are with great deployment and monitoring. CAB, the Completing Access to Broadband program, is also a really important initiative for our division this year in 2024. We're really excited that that program launched in February, and we've got a lot of the scopes of work for the counties who are participating posted online. And we're planning to keep doing awards for the Completing Access to Broadband program through the last quarter of 2024. And then later this year, we're going to announce the Stopgap Solutions program, which is also funded by American Rescue Plan Act funds, and there'll be more information coming about that this summer. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the challenge process. There are pages and pages about how this will go in our volume 1 of our initial proposal, but wanted to give you an overview of how this will work. So, and all of these dates are tentative until our volume 1 gets approved. But again, we want to be transparent and share as much information with you as we can, but just want to make sure you understand that this is all tentative until NTIA approves our volume 1. So in August or September, in that time frame, we will release the preliminary maps that are based on the deduplication process that we've done, based on previous federal and state funding and awards that have been made. and the best data available from the FCC. Then the challengers who are eligible to submit challenges to those maps will have a period of 30 days to do that. Then we will adjudicate those, and all of this will be done through a web portal. Then we'll provide the final version of the maps to everybody in the state and who challenged or didn't and who's just interested. And then we'll submit those to NTIA for approval. So here again, this is another point where we'll release what the state has determined, but we'll have to submit that data to the NTIA and get their approval before it'll be official. I also wanted to mention that who's eligible to challenge is defined by NTIA. According to NTIA's guidelines for this program, individuals may not submit a challenge to the mapping through the challenge process for BEAD eligible locations. They'll need to share, individuals will need to use an intermediary basically. So that could be a unit of local government or a nonprofit organization or an internet service provider could submit challenges on behalf of an individual. So we'll also be talking to some of those organizations who may want to serve as intermediaries so that individuals will have a way to have their voices heard and share their input as well. And I just want to say again, in the meantime, individuals should still keep filling out our broadband survey to give us the most accurate data so that we can then submit challenges to the FCC mapping on their behalf because the NTIA mapping is based on the FCC's broadband mapping. I mentioned before that we'll be using an online portal to run this process. Some more information will be coming out about that later this year as well and what that portal is going to look like. And we'll, of course, offer training for folks on how to access the portal and how to submit challenges and make sure everybody understands how the system works. And we'll be available to answer questions throughout the process as well. But we anticipate the whole process will take 90 days and that we'll finish by December of 2024 so that we can then begin making accepting proposals in January of 2025. Next slide, please. Wanted to share a bit of an overview too about the subgrantee selection process. So as I mentioned, this summer, we'll announce the pre-qualification phase of the process. And that's where internet service providers will have an opportunity to submit documentation to us in an attempt to get pre-qualified to be eligible to bid on BEAD projects in our state. So that pre-qualification process is designed for us to gather information about their financial, managerial, technical, and operational capacities so that we can make sure they're in good stead in all of those areas and have the capability to complete projects for which they may bid and be selected to build the infrastructure in those areas. Then the second phase of the process will open. Again, this is tentative, but the plan is that it'll open in January 2025, all subject to NTIA approval, and that in January 2025 we would have multiple funding rounds. We're still figuring out exactly how many, but the NTIA refers to priority projects and non-priority projects, and basically priority means fiber. So projects where we'll be able to deploy fiber to serve those locations, and then non-priority projects are the locations where fiber doesn't make sense for whatever reason or it's too expensive, and those would then we would consider alternative technologies in addition to fiber to serve those areas. After we receive the first round of proposals, we'll be calculating what NTIA refers to as the extremely high cost location threshold. So we'll calculate a number above which it doesn't make sense for the state to invest in fiber for those locations because it's too expensive and it would keep us from being able to serve everybody in the state. But we really want the benefit of getting those first proposals to see what the numbers look like so that we can set that extremely high cost location threshold as high as possible to make sure we can prioritize fiber as NTIA is directed as well. This process will involve negotiation. So think of it as kind of a best and final offer concept. The state's goal and our imperative is to serve 100% of the unserved and underserved locations in our state. So if we've if there are areas of our state where we don't receive any proposals to serve those areas, we're going to be looking at who's adjacent, what providers have submitted proposals in adjacent areas, and going to those providers and saying, what would it take for you to serve these locations as well, and giving them a chance to modify their application to incorporate those areas as well. So there's going to be a lot of back and forth between our division and the providers to make sure we get everybody served who's eligible in our state. I think that's my last slide, but Crystal, tell me if I'm wrong. Okay, yeah, so now is the chance to pose your questions, and Maggie and I will both do our best to answer them. If we don't know the answer, we'll tell you when we'll get back to you.
Well, we have received a few questions already. The first one is, when do you anticipate releasing information about providers applying to be pre-qualified for BEAD? And what will providers need to supply?
So we anticipate announcing that process this summer, probably around June. And if it'll look similar to the process we did in 2023, where providers applied to be pre-qualified for the Completing Access to Broadband, Pole Replacement, and Stopgap Solutions programs. The process will be modified in a few key ways. One, it will not operate as a procurement as the process in 2023 did. Because of these are BEAD funds, it'll operate, these are grant funds, we'll be treating those selected as subgrantees instead of contractors or vendors. And then we'll also need to modify the process to incorporate all the different BEAD requirements that we'll have that we didn't have for the American Rescue Plan Act funds.
Great. We had one follow-up question. When will the BEAD applications be due again? And I think you may have answered that in what you just said.
So I don't have a date for when they'll be due
Okay.
yet, but we anticipate opening the process in January of 2025. So it'll be sometime in 2025.
Perfect. The last question we received, and I think we mentioned this earlier, that we are recording this webinar and we will be placing it and the slides on our website later this week. It will be at ncbroadband.gov/BEAD, B-E-A-D. So those will be available then. If you have any other questions, please don't be shy and add them in the chat right now, and we will get to them. In the meantime, while you're typing frantically, I'm sure, I'm going to flip over to our last slide that shows how you can reach out to us if you have any additional questions. You can always reach us at broadband@nc.gov or digitalequity@nc.gov for questions. We'll hang on for a few more minutes and see if anybody writes in. Okay, hearing nothing, seeing no typing, we will conclude today's webinar, but we greatly appreciate everything, all the questions, all of the great feedback and content. If anybody needs us, please reach out to us at broadband@nc.gov or digitalequity@nc.gov, and you can always reach us at ncbroadband.gov, our website. If you go to /BEAD, you should see that. Oh, we have a question coming in. Should nonprofits or agencies apply in the same county work together?
I believe this probably references the competitive grant program coming out from NTIA. The answer is we really don't know. I think what is helpful now, what I've been kind of counseling or advising people is if you think that your work is going to be improved by partnerships, beginning those conversations now. So that you're not scrambling. We don't know how long the NOFA will be, but it could be 60 days. And so we don't want you scrambling at the end trying to figure out those partnerships. We don't know if letters of support will be required or not. So just kind of beginning that work now just makes a lot of sense. And as we find out more information, we will, of course, make sure that we are pointing people to that information and providing assistance that people may need. Great question.
Thank you, Maggie. Seeing no additional questions, thank you all so much for joining us today. We will place this recording on the website later this week. Thank you all.
Bye. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon.